Hi, I'm Nazmul Idris. I'm a developer advocate on the Android team at Google. This is UXD for Developers, the show where you can learn how to create better user experiences. Today, we're going to talk about what UX actually means. With me, I have a special guest, Isabel Idris, who is a mobile interaction designer that works for Good Technology. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
So Isabel, I hear the words UX design get thrown around a lot, and especially in many different contexts. People say, if you do this, you will have a good UX. If you do that, you're going to have a bad experience, and your users will have a bad time. So what is UX?
Well, user experience design is really an emergent property of design that includes visual design, interaction design, and engineering. So you can see in the slide how all of these things really need to come together, and the whole must be greater than the sum of its parts. So if any one of these things aren't great, they're going to let down the overall user experience. So user experience really involves you focusing on all the details, as well as being able to really zoom out and make sure that what you're delivering has an overall really great user experience.
That makes sense. So you mentioned the words visual design and interaction design. Can you describe the differences between the two?
So I'm an interaction designer, so I'll start with interaction design. It really involves designing a sequence of screens or a sequence of steps that the user has to go through in your application, which is what we call a flow, in order for your user to accomplish certain tasks. So those tasks depend on whatever it is that your application actually does. So interaction design takes into account how a user interacts with the data and the UI elements on each one of your screens, as well as how they interact with all of the screens together. So the data and the UI really has to be strung together in a way that makes sense for the user. So if you look at the slide, this is an example of a flow that an interaction designer might show or might give to a developer. So the next slide here is an annotated wireframe. So this is something else that I would also give to a developer. So the different annotations show what each one of those UI elements mean. So right here we're showing the action bar. So we have the app icon, a spinner, some icons, and an overflow. So a visual designer, what they do is they really specify the color palette, the iconography, the typography, and all the visual personality of your application. So they would specify the exact spacing for all the layouts of every single screen. So if you look at the slide here, this is what we would call a red line. So you can see it's a very detailed layout of that particular screen. So visual designers would provide the engineers all of the graphics assets and the icons and make sure that each screen is just perfect. So there's one other example of a visual design. These are some things that a visual designer would actually deliver to an engineer. These are like the different sizes for your icons, all the different font sizes, and all the icon set for your entire application.
So essentially, you're skinning the application. You're creating that wonderful experience. I mean, the visual aspect of that experience that is going to immediately be striking to someone.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
So interaction design, you can kind of think of it that they would provide more of a low-res wireframe, and then a visual design would give you like a high-res mock that's really detailed.
Sense. So I get it. So basically, UX design has to take into account interaction design, visual design, and engineering, and put them all together in a way that delivers delight at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
So from a developer's perspective, the way I'd like to think about it is that I write code that might, there's visual code I write, non-visual code I write, and both of those come together to deliver the overall user experience. But the visual code specifically delivers the UI. Is that a good way to think about it as well?
Yeah, and I think that Google Now is a really great example of a product that delivers a really great user experience, and it really embodies awesomeness at every level, the interaction, the visual, and the engineering.
Right.
So I think it's something that we can talk about a little bit more. Do you have any examples of how an application or experience like Google Now could hypothetically have gone terribly wrong?
Definitely. So we were talking about visual design for quite a bit. So Google Now, is one of the most striking things about it is that the cards are really, really easy to read. The typography is great. It's very easy to digest a lot of information without thinking much at all. So if Google Now delivered the same quality of information, it was accurate and relevant, but if it looked really bad, like if the margins were off and the padding was off and the images are all ugly, then I think it would make the user think that it was a very unprofessional application.
Yeah. I think that things like typography and spacing and that polish that's in Google Now is one of the things that makes it so successful. Of course, the relevant data surfacing just when you need it is crucially important. But what I really love about Google Now is how I can just glance at a card in just a second. I can get a lot of information from it. There's really really low cognitive load to those cards. I can just glance at it and that's it.
No, that makes sense. So visual design is very important.
Yeah.
So kind of switching gears a little bit. So let's say the visuals for Google Now, since we are talking hypothetically about how the UX could go horribly wrong. So if, let's say, Google Now had just amazing data, it was surfacing, the content was totally, if the cards looked really great as they do today, but let's say the data was lacking, like it didn't know your current location, or it surfaced a card about some upcoming flight that you have to be on and the details are wrong. So in that situation, that would be a really bad user experience, right?
Yes.
Because one thing that I would feel at that point as a user is that I can't trust the information that I'm getting, even though it looks visually striking.
Yeah, trust is a really important part of user experience. I'm glad you brought that up, because trust is like one of those emergent properties that has to do with really great design and really great engineering. So I think trust is something that as developers we should all really focus on, because when someone trusts your application, that's what's going to get your users to give you these 5-star reviews in the App Store. And these reviews are what's going to make you ultimately successful. That's
true, and then they'd share your application as well, and there'd be social proof in what you're doing and so on. So absolutely, trust is one of those very, very important emergent properties that I think that everybody should aspire to accomplish. So let's use a different example than Google Now. So I think we've highlighted how bad visual design could wreck a user experience, how bad engineering could wreck it. So let's talk about how bad interaction design could also wreck it. So we've all used Android phones, and if you think back at the first minute experience you had with a new Android phone, the first thing Android asks you to do is sign into your Gmail account. Once you've done that, it basically automatically signs you into all the other Google apps that you have, like Play, Maps, and YouTube. So imagine an alternate universe where instead of this wonderful flow, we add a lot of friction, where let's say you've initially signed in with Gmail, but then for every other Google application that you go to run, you now have to sign into it over and over and over again. Like, what would the user think in that situation? Like, I would be almost discouraged from using my phone in the ways that I would want to use it because of the tremendous amount of friction that had been created in the interaction that I'm having with these different applications. So it's a higher level flow, if you will, of how a user interacts with your phone that's being impacted by individual decisions that are being made at the application level. So
that's one of those aspects of being able to get the details right and then actually zooming out and looking at how all those details, and in this case, how the first minute experience of using all these applications really affects the overall user experience, which is the Android user experience of the phone.
Exactly. So it's almost as if like you have to be a good citizen as an application developer. Your applications have to be a good citizen on the device and not only deliver a good experience inside of that application, but also in the context of the larger phone or operating system that it's actually that's actually living in. That also impacts things like battery life and and so on. Okay, so it's clear that many things need to come together to make a user experience truly great, and clearly that design is everyone's responsibility.
Exactly. Designers alone cannot create great user experiences. So I want to say that one more time, that designers alone cannot create a great user experience and are not responsible alone for creating a user experience.
Right.
It takes an entire team. So great user experience really involves equal amounts of amazing design and amazing engineering effort, and really amazingness across the board by all the members of the product team. So just to give a shout out to all these other people that are not engineers or designers, these include tech writers, product managers, project managers, directors, managers. So you really need excellence at every level.
No, definitely. And also I think we should also shout out to user researchers, prototypers, and so on, who are also part of the design team that contribute in a big way to making sure the experience actually works.
Exactly, and
works for users.
Yeah, and designers can work to create and prototype really amazing designs, but in the end of the day, these designs still have to get built by engineers. So an example, let's say a designer creates a really amazing and elegant and functional mobile newsreader application, and they test it with users. It has really great user feedback, and they say, okay, this design is perfect. So they give it to the engineers. But when the engineers build it, they don't put in prefetching, caching, and they don't do efficient data transfers, and they drain the battery.
Yeah, Radar tells us we should always do efficient data transfers.
Always do efficient data transfers. So these amazing designs are never going to be fully realized or appreciated due to these bad engineering practices. And this is something that designers have no control over. They can't control if you use prefetching, caching, and if you do data transfers inefficiently. So overall, this is going to result in a bad user experience. Your users are going to feel impatient and frustrated and overall have a bad time.
Definitely.
So UX design is really important. It's everyone's responsibility, and it's really important that everyone in the team comes together to make a great experience.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a great show. Do you want to plug the UX community?
Oh yeah, feel free to join our Google Plus design community. The link will be in the description below. And we're going to put a link to the episode on here. And if you have any questions or comments about our episodes, or just any questions about UX in general, or if you have suggestions about topics you want us to cover for upcoming shows, please feel free to leave us a post on there.
And we also curate a tremendous amount of really good user experience related information, especially for developers. So please check that out for that reason as well. Thank you again, and see you next time.